Hello, friends. Welcome back. So, Sifu Sylvain Chamberlain here to assist and guide you through your studies of uh, Lotus Sutra, Buddhism in its entirety. Today, I'm going to endeavor to complete uh, the discussion on Chapter 7 of the Lotus Sutra. Um, Hopefully you already watched part 1. If not, you probably should do that before I continue here. This will be part 2. And before we get into it, just to make sure we all understand and hear each other correctly, let's do Daimoku Sancho, please. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you very much. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. It's interesting, the emails I get and the questions that I get on Quora.com. And by the way, thank you, all of you who do make comments on the YouTube videos, and those of you who are supporting this process and my endeavor to do this on Patreon.com. Your support means everything to me. It is extremely rewarding, beyond description, to endeavor, first of all, to try to I so resist the word teaching because all of the teaching really happens in the student, you. But whatever my effort is to try to share my thoughts on these writings, Buddha's writings, the scholarship of Buddhism, to try to help simplify, clarify, and deepen understanding in Buddhist teaching. It takes a lot of effort, and quite crassly, it takes money. That's just what makes things move in the world today. And any support that you can lend to that is deeply, deeply appreciated. So thank you, Debbie Schaefer, Reed, and Christopher Murray. Both of you recently started supporting me through Patreon, and I can't thank you enough. To the rest of you who make comments, either on Quora or on Patreon or on YouTube, your support is invaluable also, because this isn't just about money. This is about knowing that I'm reaching people. And your comments and your questions, although many of them are generous comments, which is really great from the standpoint of knowing that I'm reaching people. But also, when you ask questions, which many of you do, it alerts me that there's always something new or something to be learned in various ways, as we're reading about in the Lotus Sutra. It also alerts me to areas of discussion that I may not have either been clear about or just kind of skipped over. So, your input is extremely valuable in order to make this mission of spreading the teachings effective and valuable and value creating. So just a short shout out to all of you. Thank you so much. I really mean that. Okay, so we started, we got a good ways through a very large chapter, chapter 7, where there's a lot of hyperbole, a lot of setup for a very clear and actually brief message to all of those he was teaching at the time. Remember, this is in the late part of his teaching life, so he'd had some students and disciples for some as long as over 40 years. And what he was noticing and what he's talking about in chapter 7 is how uh, humans, samsaric conditions, we tend to fall short of complete understanding of things because we're in such a hurry to grasp to, okay, I got it, and then we stop listening and we stop growing. So this chapter is a very stern uh, admonishment against that, as well as again a repetition of this is the important teaching. You're not there yet, and he actually says that in the teachings. And I may read uh, that H. Kern version translation from the late 1800s, um, just in one part, just to demonstrate how the translations can obfuscate meaning. But since I'm here and we're talking across translations, the meaning is clearly there. It's the same. Okay. So continuing with chapter 7, let's start with, I guess I'll start in this paragraph, and I may jump again, because as I said, there's a lot of, what's the word when you just, it's not erudition. There's a tremendous amount of repetition and restating from different places, the same thing over and over again. And I'm human, so I get tired of that. But I've read it many times, so I encourage you to read it. I'm not being a good example, I suppose. So let's just start. Monks, I tell you now that these disciples of the Buddha, the 16 novices, have all attained supreme awakening. In all the lands in every direction at the present time they preach the Dharma and have innumerable hundreds of thousands of billions of bodhisattvas and shravakas as their followers. 2 of those novices became Buddhas in the eastern region. One is named Akshobhya and lives in the land of joy. The other is named Sumero Peak. The 2 are Buddhas of the southern region. One is named Lion's Voice, the other Lion's Character. 2 Buddhas are in the southern regions, one named Space Dweller, the other Ever Extinguished. One of the 2 Buddhas in the southern region is named Imperial Character, the other Brahma Character. Of the 2 Buddhas in the western regions, one is named Amida, the other Saving All Worlds from Suffering. Of the 2 Buddhas in the northwest region, one is named Tamalapatra, spiritually powerful sandal fragrance, and the other Sumero form. Of the 2 Buddhas in the northern region, one is named See, this can be very confusing because in our human mind, we see these as all actual people, incarnations, if you will. But they're not. They're just labels of different forms of the same enlightened mind. Awareness. Awareness to an Eskimo is different than awareness to a Brazilian, although they both can claim complete awareness. It's just from a different place. It's a little confusing because what is that awareness? Well, it's an awareness that's still in samsara. It's still based in the human delusion, and yet it's taking form of an enlightened, awakened state in different ways. But the truth is, as we'll discover, see, this is a setup. As we'll discover, all of those different ways and everything, he's talking specifically to his audience, which hasn't heard this teaching yet. Even though he's in the midst of teaching it, he's still talking to people that aren't there yet. They're listening to him, but as you heard in the previous chapter, they all said in unison to him, We understand it now. We understand what it is, and we know we can teach it because we understand it, but we have no hope of attaining it for ourselves. It's kind of like the old cliche, those who can't do teach. But they're missing it. So that's why still in this chapter he's still talking to these people who think they get it. But how can you get it if you don't do it? How can you know what it's like to hit a home run in a World Series game at the professional level if you've never played baseball? Or even if, more to the point, you played baseball all through high school and college. You may have reached a lot of fame and acclaim at those levels, but you still don't know what it's like to achieve it at the professional level, right? So, I mean, that's a weak analogy, but I think it makes my point. So he's still talking to them. So let's continue. Monks, when we were novices, each of us taught and transformed living beings equal in number to innumerable hundreds of thousands. This is the influence of practicing Buddhism. So what he's saying is, even if you're not fully accomplished, the fact that you're doing it, that you're studying it, contemplating it, integrating it into your life, is hugely effective to influence others. Even if not a formal sangha, a formal gathering. Sangha also means community. It doesn't mean they're all practicing Buddhism. It doesn't mean they're all determined to be bodhisattvas, even though they are. They just don't know it. It means the influence of you changing your attachment. It changes your behavior in samsara. It changes the way you move through this human state. And we're all influenced by others, by not just other human beings, the weather, the sky, the plants, animals. We're influenced by everything. That's the samsaric state. So if we're influenced by everything, then what we do influences everything around us. That's why in Buddhism, there's no separation between your self, quote unquote, and your environment, quote unquote. We all have, each and every one of us has our own world, and it includes, most definitely, our influence, both coming into us and going out of us. We're a closed system, even though we think of ourselves as distinct from everything around us. This is something, I'll say something that I think sounds very Alan Watts like. We think, and this is going to be a little weird, but stay with me. When we look at I don't know if you're inside or outside, I'll assume that you're indoors, whether it's your home or a big building or a school or whatever. But as you look around, you'll see things. Like right now, I'm seeing several books on a shelf. Okay? But now let's take that apart a little bit, which is what Buddhism loves to do, right? What I'm seeing is a stream of light that's entering through my eyeballs, hitting my rods and cones in the back of my eye, my retina, sending signals, electronic signals through nerves to a brain center. I think the vision center is by the occipital lobe. It's in the very back of the brain. How ironic that what I see, quote unquote, in front of me is actually being interpreted by my brain in the back of me. And in my brain, images are being created, colors are being perceived, mass is being perceived, all sorts of attributes, characteristics are being associated from those light particles and nerve signals in my brain. And in my brain, I imagine that all of this that I'm seeing is outside of me, the duality. But where is it really occurring? In my head, in me. Think about that. The books and the shelf and the wall and everything that I'm seeing, the seeing is being manufactured in my head. So where is all that stuff really? It's in my head. I can close my eyes and I can still see it. It's in my head. If I move forward and run into it, then there's more information in my brain to assert that what I'm seeing in my head is real and other. But it exists in my head. Play with that. I just think that's a great mental exercise. So explain to them how the influence is amazing. Ganges transformed Tathagata. Why? Because the wisdom of the Tathagata is hard to believe and hard to understand. All those living beings, innumerable as the sands of the Ganges, who were transformed at the time, are yourselves, monks, and those who will be my Shravaka disciples in ages to come after my extinction. Now, words like extinction, they're a little devilish, because in this instance, he's talking about his leaving his bodily human form. But extinction is often used throughout the teachings as leaving the human form, but remaining here as a human being in order to lead others in the teachings, which is what Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha anyway, really is. He's a Buddha in mind, but he's a bodhisattva on earth. He's a bodhisattva as a human apparition who is fully enlightened and awakened to the Buddha mind. But even his bodhisattva body is going to disintegrate, as everything does, impermanence. And so there's an extinction of the thoughts and cravings that manifest that body when you manifest the Buddha mind. That isn't a physical death, it's a perceptive death. As much as it is awakening, it's still a duality because we're in samsara. And that's an important point to keep in mind as you study Buddhism. Otherwise, you can start to get nihilistic about it. You can start to read all of this and go, well, I mean, we don't reach Buddha nature until we die. Well, that's very religious thinking. I can't think of a religious organization on earth that doesn't promote the solution to all life's problems after you die, after you're no longer human. But Buddhism isn't about that. Buddhism is about living a happy, productive, value-creating, joyful life. It's about living this life with no suffering. So there is a death of sorts, but it's not a physical death. It's a stuck mind sort of death. It's a stop believing the delusion and become clear-minded sort of death. It's an aha sort of life. But life, physical life, has an arc, a physical arc. as much as it has a mental arc. So there's no denial of existence. There's a denial that this existence is a permanent, ongoing thing. Like people who talk about soul. It's nonsensical to a Buddhist, because we understand that that's just a provisional kind of mysticism that we create around wanting this to continue forever. We want permanence, which is why we have this entire elusive state of samsaric human condition. It's why this continues to exist, even though it's, as I get more decrepit, as I'm disassembling, I can see my illusion dying away. At some point, that illusion, that illusional state, is going to die. It's going to be extinct. But with Buddhism, what we're trying to do is get to that extinction while we're still in it. Because if we can extinct the cravings and clingings that force this thing along, to give this life momentum, that arc, if we can remove ourselves from it while we're still in it, then we can enjoy the amazement of being in this form without all of the ickiness of the emotions and the perceptions, the painful things, the sorrow, the dis-ease, right? So it's a mindset. It's not a mindset of death. It's a mindset of I don't need to be controlled by my monkeys, by my cravings, right? Okay, so it's a way of life, not a waiting for death. But the words can be, the words come from here and this place. So it's very difficult to use the words and explain what he's saying. This is why he's always reminding us how difficult it is to understand. Okay, so now he's talking about all these disciples, and he says, this is the important part now. Following my extinction, there will also be disciples of mine who, neither hearing this sutra nor knowing or understanding the ways that bodhisattvas pursue, will by their own merits conceive an idea of extinction and enter what they think is nirvana. At that time, I will be a Buddha in another land under a different name. In other words, the state of Buddha never changes. It's just that when I'm not here teaching it, many disciples of mine will think that they've got it, and they will conceive of their own idea of what nirvana is and think they've arrived. These disciples, though they conceive the idea of extinction and enter what they think is nirvana, will seek the wisdom of the Buddha in that other land and succeed in hearing this sutra, for only by the Buddha vehicle will they attain real extinction. There is no other vehicle except the teachings used as skillful means by the Tathagatas. Monks, if a Tathagata knows that his time of nirvana has arrived, and that the assembly is pure, firm in conviction and strong mind and understanding, deeply understands the emptiness of things, and enters deeply into meditation, then he will gather together all the bodhisattvas and shravakas and preach this sutra to them. In the whole world, there is no second vehicle for attaining extinction. There is only the one Buddha vehicle for attaining extinction. You should know, monks, that with skillful means, the Tathagata reaches deeply into the nature of living beings. He knows that they delight in lesser teachings and are deeply attached to the five desires. For their sake, he preaches nirvana, so that if they hear it, they will receive it in strong mind. Suppose there was a bad road 500 leagues long, which was steep, wild, difficult, deserted, and far from where anyone lived, a truly frightening place. And a large group of people wanted to go along that road to a place where there were rare treasures. There was a leader and teacher, a guide, who was knowing and wise, knew the difficult road well, where it was open and where it was closed, and was experienced in leading groups that wanted to pass over it. Obviously, this is an analogy again. The group he was leading became tired along the way and said to the guide, "We are utterly exhausted and afraid as well. We can't go any further. Since the road before us goes on and on, now we want to turn back." The guide, a person of many skillful means, thought, "What a shame that these people want to give up on the great rare treasure and turn back." Having thought about it in this way, he used his powers of skillful means to conjure up a castle city, which appeared about 300 leagues down the difficult road. Then he said to the group, "Don't be afraid. You must not turn back. Look, see that great city ahead? There you can stop and rest and do whatever you want. Enter this city and you will soon be completely at ease. Later, when you are able to go toward the place of treasures, you should leave this castle city." Then the hearts of the exhausted group were filled with great joy, and they exclaimed about such an unprecedented thing. "Now we can surely escape from this dreadful road and find some peace and comfort." So the group went into the fantastic castle city, thinking they had been rescued from their difficulties. They were soon calm and comfortable. He's talking about the Hinayanist now, and all of his followers who were really stuck in a Hinayana place still adhered to the five desires, still adhered to the duality of life. Then the guide, seeing that the group was rested and no longer weary, made the fantastic city disappear. He said to the group, "We have to go now. The place of the treasures is close. I created this large fantastic city a little while ago just for you to rest in." Monks, so it is with the Tathagata. At present he is functioning as your great guide. He knows that the bad road of birth and death and afflictions is steep, difficult, long, and never-ending, but that it must be taken and traveled over. See, it's in this life where you will attain awakening. If living beings only hear of the one Buddha vehicle, they will not want to see the Buddha or approach him, but think that the Buddha way is long and never-ending, and success something that can be attained only after long suffering from arduous work. Now, this is what I was saying. This is what most religious thinking leads to, is that can't possibly get there in this life. It's going to be some magical place I go to after I die. No, he's trying to blow that kind of thinking apart right here. So not just my opinion, here it is. The Buddha, knowing that this frame of mind is timid and weak, uses the power of skillful means, preaching the two kinds of nirvana in order to provide a resting place along the way. If living beings remain in these two stages, then the Tathagata will say to them, "You have not yet understood what you have to do." The place where you remain is only close to Buddha wisdom. Take note and think some more. The nirvana that you have attained is not the real one. The Tathagata, through skillful means, has only taken the one Buddha vehicle, made distinctions within it, and spoken of three: Sravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattva. Now I highlighted this next little paragraph. The Buddha is just like that guide who, in order to provide a place for the travelers to rest, conjured up a great castle city, and after they had rested, told them, "The place of treasures is close. This city is not real, but only something I conjured up." At that time, the world-honored one, wanting to say what he meant again, spoke in verse. A lot of verse. He's repeating all that storytelling. He goes into a lot of detail. The verse portion really nails stuff down, even though it's somewhat repetitious. It does come to some specifics that are, again, skillful means, spark the mind. The last three stanzas I circled here as kind of summing up this whole chapter. Now I teach the truth for you. What you have reached is not extinction. To gain a Buddha's comprehensive wisdom, you have to make a great effort. When you have gained comprehensive wisdom and the 10 powers of Buddha Dharma and acquired the 32 characteristics, then that is real extinction. The Buddhas as guides teach nirvana to provide rest. But seeing that you are rested, they lead you on to the Buddha wisdom. Okay. There was a term in here that I thought, I wonder. Now, in the old translations, what I said I might quote something out of, that those last 3 stanzas go something like this. Come here, what I have to tell you. This city I have produced is by magic. On seeing you fatigued, I have, lest you should go back, made use of this device. Now strain your energy to reach the isle. In the same manner, monks, I am the guide, the conductor of thousands of kodas of living beings. In the same manner, I see creatures toiling and unable to break the shell of the egg of evils. Then I reflect on this matter. These beings have enjoyed repose, have been tranquil, quiescent. Now I will remind them of the misery of all things, and I say, at the stage of Arhat, you shall reach your aim. At that time, when you shall have attained that state, and when I see all of you have become Arhats, then I will call you all together and explain to you how the law really is. See, he's specifically talking to Arhats here, which the modern translation kind of stays away from. But it's important for you to understand why there's such a huge chasm between Hinayana Buddhists and Mahayana Buddhists. Theravadins, listen up, because you're Hinayana. It is an artifice of the leaders when they, the great seers, show 3 vehicles, for there is but one vehicle, no second. It is only to help creatures that 2 vehicles are spoken of. It's a device. Therefore, I now tell you, monks, rouse to the utmost your lofty energy for the sake of the knowledge of the all-knowing. As yet, you have not come so far as to possess complete nirvana, or as it's called in the modern, extinction. So I'm going to read a little bit about nirvana so you guys really get this point. But when you shall have attained the knowledge of the all-knowing and the 10 powers proper to jhanas, which is enlightened ones, you shall become Buddhas marked by the 32 characteristic signs and rest forever. Such is the teaching of the leaders. In order to give quiet, they speak of repose, but When they see that the creatures have had a repose, they, knowing this to be no final resting place, initiate them in the knowledge of the all-knowing. All right? So, same thing. I kind of like the directness of the old, but you may prefer the New Age one. It all means the same thing. So now I've got a Buddhist dictionary, and I'm curious to see what it says about nirvana. Nichiren, Nichiren school, nine divisions, a lot of nines. Okay. Oh, wow. Nirvana school, nirvana of remainder, or nirvana of no remainder. Okay, nirvana. Sanskrit, Pali, nibbana, Japanese, nihan. Enlightenment, the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice. The Sanskrit word nirvana means blown out, and is variously translated as extinction, emancipation, cessation, quiescence, or non-birth. That's the first time I've seen quiescence. Or non-birth. Nirvana was originally regarded as the state in which all illusions and desires, as well as the cycle of birth and death, are extinguished. Hinayanists distinguish two types of nirvana. The first is that of an arhat, who has eliminated all illusions and will no longer be reborn in the six paths, but who is still bound to the world of suffering in that he possesses a body. This is called the nirvana of remainder, or incomplete nirvana. The second is that which the arhat achieves at death, when both the body and mind, the sources of suffering, are extinguished. This is called the nirvana of no remainder, or complete nirvana. Because Hinayana Buddhism teaches that the ultimate goal of practice can only be achieved at death, it was called the teaching of reducing the body to ashes and annihilating consciousness. Very nihilist. Mahayanists criticized the practice directed toward this goal as escapist and indifferent to the salvation of others, and probably derogatively coined the above phrase in Mahayana Buddhism. Nirvana came to mean not so much an exit from the phenomenal world as an awakening to the true nature of phenomena, or the attainment of Buddha wisdom. Even in Mahayana Sutras, however, this attainment is regarded as requiring the elimination of earthly desires in the same manner as expounded by the Hinayana teachings. Therefore, it is taught that nirvana requires an immeasurably long period to achieve. In contrast, and this is the important part, in contrast, the Lotus Sutra teaches that by awakening to one's innate Buddha nature, one can reach the state of nirvana in his or her present form as an ordinary person who possesses earthly desires and undergoes the sufferings of birth and death. It reveals the principle that the sufferings of birth and death are none other than nirvana. From the standpoint of the Lotus Sutra, birth and death are two integral phases of eternal life. Nirvana, therefore, is not the cessation of birth and death, but a state of enlightenment experienced as one repeats the cycle of birth and death. The sufferings of birth and death and nirvana, or enlightenment, are inseparable. It is not necessary to extinguish one in order to attain the other. These sufferings belong to the 9 worlds, and nirvana to the world of Buddhahood. The 9 worlds and the world of Buddhahood are mutually inclusive. By manifesting the state of Buddhahood, one enjoys nirvana while repeating the cycle of birth and death. So, there it is. In other words, you can truly enjoy watching an entire game of tennis and the excellence of others playing tennis without having to be in every tennis match. That's very simplistic, but trying to get you to open your mind up to the idea that although it is our energy and our kinetic momentum of this constant instantiation of being, of every single atom and particle in our body, along with our memories, which is mind, seeming to persist over time, it doesn't have to end. What needs to end is our perception that that is everything, that our experience of life is not the complete picture of reality, life. That if we can remove ourselves in our minds from the attachments to this idea of this is me and you are you and this duality, and we can then see clearly without the attachment that we are all funny little beings doing things in response to our egos and our monkey mind. And as entertaining as it is, it also precipitates misery and discomfort and suffering. And so then with that mind, we become very concerned about people's happiness. That's why that word keeps coming up, especially in modern practice of Buddhism. We see how it's created, and so we want to educate everyone to see how they're creating their own misery so that they can stop being attached to the things that precipitate it and join us in a much more objective mind set that allows us to live continuously in this life while being unaffected and uninfluenced by these unreasonable expectations and attachments of permanence, which lead to all our suffering. This was the goal from the very start. Siddhartha Gautama was a prince who, when he came out of his protected shell of the kingdom, witnessed all the suffering around him, quite physically and mentally, was so shocked that he thought, there has to be a way. I mean, I'm living a life of privilege and wonder. I don't suffer like that. So obviously there's a way that everyone should be able to live that way, even if they're not princes or kings or protected. It just doesn't make sense that there should be such a disparity in the quality of life. There's got to be a way. And he understood that there was privilege because of power and money and all of that, landowner and stuff. But he also understood that the caste system was making it so people who didn't know how to read or write would never have the chance to learn how to read or write. And gosh, just having that ability was vastly improving of life condition. The perspective of the world and how you see your own life changes immensely if you can read and write, right? So from very simple logic, he set out and expanded it to the point where if there's a truth, if there's a way to live life without suffering, including my own, because even as a prince, I live in a sheltered, now I know that I'm separated. So he's suffering in his own way. He's not free of suffering. He's just free of a lot of different kinds of suffering. But now he's suffering knowing that he's so separated and not experiencing his life fully. So he transcends. That's why he leaves. He leaves the kingdom. He leaves his father. He goes off and he says, I'm going to pursue a life of meditation and a holy life. You know, I'm going the way of the Brahmins. And then he studied with many Brahmins of different teachings, learnings. And I mean, practiced uh, asceticism to an extreme. Almost died because he wanted to go to the nth degree. He's a prince. His privileged mind told him there are no limits except my own demise. Um, so in a way, that strengthened him to go through some of these things, uh, these rituals, far more deeply and further than ordinary people and other Brahmins even who were privileged class, but maybe not privileged the way he was as a prince, right? So anyway, all of that comes down to one day he just gets fed up because it's been 6 years or so that he's been doing all of these things and he's just not, he's to the point of death, he's not getting an answer. So he just sits down under a tree for some shade from the heat and the humidity in India. He said, I'm going to sit here and close my eyes and I'm going to consider this until it comes to me or I'll just expire. I mean, this is it. I know there's an answer. There has to be an answer. And if in my life it's not here for me to see, then I just don't want this life. I mean, he really came down to the challenge of his life. And it was in that meditative state where he finally let go of so much expectation, even from the expectation of finding the answer, that it just delivered itself to him. It didn't come from anywhere else. It came from his own perceptive mind. Why? Because it'd been there all along. It was just held down and buried under all this other illusion. Privileged prince, intellectual Brahmin, untouchables, farmers, cobblers, merchants, prostitutes, all have the same exact issue. Doesn't matter from what walk of life you're in. That's the extremely democratic realization of Buddhism. That there just is no difference. Oh, wait, there's no difference. There's no difference in anything. We're all the same stuff. Remember Joni Mitchell? We are stardust. Well, very, very aptly, there simply is no difference. All the differences are a matter of perception. I myself have witnessed this in my professional life. I was a petrochemical field engineer making buku bucks, and I've worked at uh, corporations as a file clerk, all with the same information, doing my job in the same diligent way, getting all kinds of accolades from any level. I was a chimney sweep, for crying out loud. And the people whose chimneys I did were very, very appreciative of me and wanted to take pictures and all that kind of stuff. I wore the top hat and all that stuff. Because everything I approach in life, I approach with the same zeal and desire for, not, I won't say perfection, but to do things well. And people appreciate people who do things well or want to do things well. It's a different spirit of being, right? But my point is, as a clerk, I earned $9 an hour. As a petrochemical engineer, I made thousands of dollars a week. Thousands. But I was the same person in both positions. Why is that? Again, a really tangible earthly example for me in my life that as a clerk, I'm perceived as disposable, but I'm no less disposable than the guy who's in the elite. Because you hear it all the time. Everyone's replaceable. I mean, it's used as a threat normally, But yeah, the guy who's saying it's also disposable. The woman who's threatening you with you is also disposable. We're all disposable. Why? Because we're just perceptions. We're just experiences. Not that that's invalid, but it's much more democratic than our egos would like us to think. Well, I have a BMW. It's a car, dude. Relax. Right? All right. That's enough for today. Next is chapter 8. I love you guys for going along with my little flights of fancy. I hope all of it, though, my sincere desire is that I let myself fly like this because I'm hoping that, hey, we know each other for a reason. And maybe this is just the way you need to hear this stuff for you to get that moment of realization. That's all I want to do. I want to help you understand that this isn't some mystical, magical thing, that this is something you already know, that we're just trying to kind of wake it up or take away the heaps of obstacles that are keeping you from experiencing it fully. That's all it is. You just have a lot of crud. There's a bunch, you go four-wheeling, there's a bunch of mud on your windshield you can't see. You got to get that mud off of there, and then, blue sky. Okay? All right. Let's do Daimoku Sancho. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Life is just mud on your windshield. That's great. Might just title this video that. Take care.